Okay, thank you very much, Scott, for the kind and lengthy introductions. Actually, we thought we'd break things up a little bit and steer clear of slides entirely, and just and run this one as a little bit of a fireside chat. Obviously, for those that were in the room for the previous session, you just had a nice introduction, I guess, to open banking a little bit from the team that were up here. Maybe if I could just start with that, that typical little bit of audience interaction. Could I maybe have a show of hands of who, before they came into the room today at least, consider themselves somewhat familiar with what open banking is and aims to achieve? Okay, quite a few. Could you keep those up? Could you leave them up if you already have begun or are involved in kind of implementing open banking in some way into your company's products or services? Okay, that's probably about half the room. Okay, that's fantastic. As I said, Scott's already done some wonderful introductions for us. I guess just to touch a little bit on Yapily to position who we are and what we do before we then talk most of the time today about Pleo. So we exist, to make it possible for better and fairer financial services to be available to everybody through the concept of creating an open economy. And when we talk about making those services available, we're talking about both consumers and businesses, particularly small businesses. So the focus that we're going to give today is a little bit less on the consumer side of things and much more on how open banking is helping businesses, particularly small businesses, especially at the time and the environment we're in, where financial well-being, cost of living, cash flow management, and so on are all very, very crucial topics. So I'm delighted to be joined by Joe from that perspective. Joe will say a bit more about himself and his company in just a minute. But Pleo are very much one of this new guard of kind of the experts in business expense and cash flow management and so on. So very, very kind of relevant and timely, I guess, for the topic today. We'll mainly focus on that topic of financial well-being. Time permitting, we'll also get a little bit into the areas of how open banking is enabling growth and innovation more broadly for businesses. But maybe first of all, I'll just turn it over to Joe first of all. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about kind of yourself and Pleo to get started.
Sure, happy to. So yeah, my name's Joe, and I'm a product manager at Pleo. But I've been building products and payments for a little while now. So I started out in retail tech, trying to help merchants accept card payments in store. And that was quite a lot of fun. A lot of what I was spending my time on was trying to get modern iPads to work with sort of ancient payment terminals. After that fact, I also realized that I was quite frustrated by the amount of merchant service fees that merchants had to pay to just accept cards, that simple act of moving money. So I joined a company called Wise in London. And Wise is responsible for moving money around the world in a super fast and efficient way. And what I was doing there was building API products to try and bundle that up and take that network and put it into a position that other fintechs can use it to also move money around the world. More recently, I joined Pleo, so I joined this year, and I look after localization and expansion in product. What that means is trying to take Pleo to more places. So we went to 10 markets in 10 months this year, which has been pretty exciting. And then secondly, localizing. So when we go to those places, how do we make Pleo fit better? And obviously a very key component part of that is how we work with payment infrastructure in the countries that we go to.
Great, okay. So we'll start with this topic of financial well-being. And as you heard Nicole actually from Yapily mention in the session immediately prior, we just completed a piece of primary research around kind of the impact of financial well-being as it relates to open banking. So I'm just going to rattle off some statistics just to kind of whet everybody's appetite. Nicole talked about some of the consumer impacts there around, 95% of us are saying, that we're very concerned about the cost of living crisis and starting to use, financial budgeting and money management apps for the first time in the last 12 months. If we look at that through the lens of businesses, however, some of the statistics are, I guess, equally enlightening. 94% of businesses have changed their business processes already due to the cost of living crisis. 75% of businesses have turned to financial products and services in the last 12 months to help them manage cash flow better. This is really interesting. 35% of businesses trust challenger banks now just as much as traditional banks with their money. and equally when it comes to data handling. And so this topic of trust amongst banks and that shift from the traditional banks to the challenger banks is one that's very relevant. Equally, we've seen research that said, cost per transaction on card payments has risen 600% since 2014. 82% of businesses fail as a result of poor cash flow management these days. So as we think about that, Joe, maybe I guess in terms of Pleo and your customers, how do you guys kind of reconcile this, and what does this all mean for what you guys do?
Maybe I could start as well with exactly what Pleo does. So Pleo is a business spend management solution. We're the leading spend management platform in Europe. And what that essentially means is that if you're a business that wants to set up your employees to be able to pay for the things that they need at work, then you'll choose Pleo. Financial well-being comes into it because your stat was really important, this 35%. So we're a FinTech, and that means that our customers still have a lot of their money in high street banks. And if they want to get their money into Pleo so that they can actually use Pleo cards or use Pleo invoice payments, they need a way to get that money out of those banks and into Pleo, right? So financial well-being comes into it because that's a cash flow management task. And if businesses aren't on top of keeping their Pleo account topped up, it can mean they don't pay their invoices on time, and it can mean, essentially running out of money at a time where they need it.
Yeah. And I know that you guys look a lot at kind of some of the factors that relate to, payments, payment acceptance, payment declines, and so on.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're seeing there?
Yeah, so Pleo processes like 2 million expenses a month, and we see about 1.8% of those expenses declined due to insufficient funds in the Pleo account. So we're looking at all the ways that we can make it easier for businesses to make sure they have enough money sitting with Pleo.
And so those problems that you're solving then for those businesses, like, why is it that they're finding themselves, I guess, in a place where they have insufficient funds in their account?
Yeah, there's two primary reasons. So the first is that when a business tries to move money into Pleo, they simply make a mistake. So maybe they put the wrong reference, or maybe they enter the wrong information, and then that money never makes its way to Pleo. And the second is around timing. So you remember that there's going to be a conference that many of your employees are going to in London at a certain month of the year, right? And you forget to top up your Pleo account with enough money. You can end up having declines for that reason as well, because you try to move money on the weekend and it doesn't arrive in time for when that expense actually goes out.
And I know when we were preparing for this session the other day, you mentioned that statistic that you mentioned already. You guys went live, 10 countries, 10 months, very, very rapid rate of expansion. Maybe talk to us a little bit about how Pleo kind of managed that exercise, and what is the role of open banking playing in all of this?
Yeah, so for the 10 countries in 10 months, it was quite a bit of an exercise of figuring out what are the key things that we need to solve when we get to those markets that we go to, right, as Pleo. And from a product perspective, which is absolutely where I was focused, like the main things were, when you get to a new place, your system needs to work with the accounting system there, right? The second thing is you need to make sure that you have the right language and you have the right support for the locales in that market. But then the third major thing is payment infrastructure. Like, say we go to 10 markets, and in each of those markets, there's 10 different banks that customers are using, right? They need a way to get the money from those banks into Pleo so that our product can actually be used in those places. So the main thing we focused on in cooperation with Yapily was how can we take open banking as a way to get the best payment infrastructure sort of out of the box in all of those markets that we go to. And so far, we've launched in the UK. Last week, we went live in the Netherlands, which is super exciting. And we're planning on, I think, France next. But we're planning to go to all of those 10 markets with open banking. And
so that rate of expansion is fast, but those companies, your customers that need to move money in a kind of a non-open banking world, how are they doing that? What are the challenges that they're kind of facing with doing that and so on?
Yeah, so it does vary quite a bit by market, which is one of the biggest challenges. So you'll find in the UK, customers are needing to top up manually. So they'll say, okay, I need £2,000 in my account, for example. They'll send an email to their finance team and ask them to move that money out of their high street bank right into Pleo. The challenges with that are what we talked about before with not sending that money at the right time or making a mistake when you send it, right? The other thing is where you see differences in markets, for example, is in the Netherlands. It's completely different. The Netherlands has had a payment system called Ideal for a long time, where 80% of transfers go through. And that's essentially being able to authorize the transfer with your phone when you top up, which has made the open banking experience like a lot better in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and I would imagine that you would see similar localization requirements in each of the markets that you kind of expand to. How, give us some context of kind of how divergent, I guess, some of those localizations need to be to accommodate that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges is that neither Pleo nor Yapily can fully control the bank experience when you go to a new market. So what we really think about is how can we make sure that no matter what bank the customer is using, when they're trying to get money out of that and into Pleo, they have the best possible experience. So using the Yapily API, we're basically designed a flow that we can measure the success rate of all of the different ways that a customer can top up, and we can route them to the one that is the most useful or the most likely to succeed. And there's a very interesting example in the Netherlands where we identified one of the banks when we were routing the customer to that bank. They were seeing a page in English instead of in Dutch. And that was causing that customer to be a little bit uncomfortable with it. Even though it was exactly the same bank, exactly the same website, they weren't comfortable entering their credentials to actually perform that payment. So we're working with Yapily to how do we make sure that the experience feels very local in any of those markets that we go to.
I guess it's like anything when it comes to payment conversion. It's those tiny little nuances and details that give the extra, percentage points of incremental conversion, and so when you add them all up, they actually translate to something, quite substantial.
Yeah, which is really surprising, right? Because it's a simple factor of the language. Like the page is the same color, the layout is the same, the fields are all the same, the information is the same, but the language was the blocker for that.
Yeah, yeah. And I know there was a lot of discussion before already about this something new and exciting called variable recurring payments, which the clue is in the name. It's about payments that happen on a regular basis where the amount of the payment is variable. So it's not always the same amount, not always at the same time of week or time of month. I know you guys are particularly excited about that as well in the context of Pleo's world. Maybe you could just expand on that a bit more.
Yeah. I'm really excited about variable recurring payments, and I still find it so difficult to say that in order. Variable recurring payments. But what it essentially is, right, is if you have two different bank accounts and you want to move money between those accounts more than once without having to sit down at your computer and authorize that transaction, you're able to do that. So you can authorize, for example, Pleo to pull money out of, for example, HSBC multiple times a month within a specific limit, so that we can keep your Pleo account topped up to the right level, right? Now that is huge, because before that, the only way you could do that was with direct debit, but there are lots of problems with the charges of direct debit and with the speed of direct debit, which we talked about before, which is so important for cash flow management. That variable recurring payments makes that a much better experience, and I think the way that you really get customers to adopt a product at speed is if you can create a 10x better experience than what you have before. And I truly think that when variable recurring payments comes and is actually prevalent in the market, it's going to be that experience.
And I think as we put that in the perspective, as you say, of kind of financial well-being for businesses, where we kind of started this, the concept of that being able to be simplified, automated, something that businesses just don't need to think about, that, again, with their consent, in an optimized and automated way, the right amount of money can be moved from bank account A to bank account B to minimize, overdraft fees, to benefit from, in the case of a business that has, a cash surplus, to benefit from preferential interest rates and all of those sorts of things. So I think across the industry, we're seeing VRP, present a whole lot of benefits to businesses as well as consumers. But I think in this world of kind of cash flow and expense management, it's fairly obvious. A lot of work still to be done, of course, but we're getting there. Maybe we can just, I guess, turn the topic to this concept of expansion across Europe a little bit more. I know you've already touched on it. Let's not paint an idealistic picture of open banking. Of course, as we heard on the previous panel, there are still some headwinds. It's still relatively new. What are some of the things that Pleo's struggling with as it relates to adoption of open banking?
Yeah, I think so. Probably one of the main things to think about is when we can't accurately measure the success rate of the different banks that our customers are using. So we've had open banking as the default way to top up your Pleo account in the UK for over 6 months now. And we're seeing 60% of all top-ups that come in the UK going through open banking, which is really great. But we've still seen reports of some customers come through to our support team, for example, and saying, oh, this was just hanging on this bank's page, or this was unsuccessful when we tried to top up with this bank. And what's really important for us at Pleo is that we can accurately measure both in the data and through the feedback we're actually getting from our customer-facing staff, what the really good banks are and what the ones are that need work. And that's when we can work on those together with Yapily, right, to influence those banks to fix their processes. But also what I said before, which is if we can identify those banks, then Pleo can do more to, for example, give instruction during the checkout flow, or we can go and route them to another top-up method, or we can do a bunch of other stuff to handle that process better.
Okay, so those kind of key metrics for you guys in terms of how successful this is conversion rates, rates of adoption. What are the other hero metrics that you look at?
Yeah, so, well, I mentioned earlier that 1.8% of payments being declined due to insufficient funds. That's a huge one, right? We want to drop that number as much as we possibly can, so that customers always have money, and you take out a client for a meal or something, you're not going to walk up and pay for it and have it decline, right? That's embarrassing. So that's one metric we will look at, is like the decline rate. But then purely just on adoption of open banking, it's the percentage of payments that are going through open banking versus other payment top-up methods, right? But then also on conversion, it's when customers hit these key milestones during when they're onboarding to Pleo. So you need to create an account, you need to verify yourself, you need to verify your business, you need to give us a bunch of information, right? And then a key thing you need to do is put your first bit of money into Pleo. That's like a very key part of a key milestone in actually signing up for Pleo. And that's where we measure that conversion rate. So when you go from being verified, we know who you are, we know your business, to having loaded your first bit of money into the Pleo account, we measure that conversion rate like very closely. And that's something, actually, we're only 6 months on the market, so we don't have conclusive results on whether that's gone up or down yet. But that's a key one that we're measuring across markets.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's phenomenal to see the very high percentages of first funds loads through open banking that you guys are already seeing, despite the fact actually that you're only 6 months in the market, with open banking as the method.
Yeah, exactly. It's 58% in September, so it continues to climb month by month.
I've got my eye on the clock down there, and we want to open up for questions just in a sec. But maybe just quickly, what's looking ahead? What's next for Pleo? What are you most excited about?
I'll go back again to sweeping or variable recurring payments. Like, I'm really excited about this because I think that is the thing that's going to change the experience for the customer dramatically enough that you start to get a real push for adoption of this across like our businesses, like our customers directly, but also in the industry among other fintechs, right? And one example I can illustrate for you is if Pleo has a very clear understanding of spend for a business, because we handle all of their invoice payments as well as all of their card payments of their people, right? Then we can predict when we need to pull more money into the Pleo account and when we could, for example, push money back out of the Pleo account. Like, that sounds maybe a bit crazy, but if we care deeply about cash flow of a business, we should have just-in-time financing for all of the spend that goes through our platform. And it shouldn't mean that we take more than we need. It shouldn't mean that we don't have enough, right? We can manage that amount really, really well.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, listen, I think with 4 minutes on the clock, I think Scott is going to, yes, there he is. Hello, Scott. He's going to join us, and we'll open it up for some questions.
Guys. Sorry, thank you, guys. If anyone has a question, you could please put your hand up. Excellent. That's what I like to see. Hands in the air straight away. If you can just start by mentioning your name and where you're from, please, and we'll try to address your question.
So my name is Abe. I'm based in London as well. I'm just very interested about the topic about open banking. I had two questions, and one, I think both these questions I'll direct to Iain. So first question, you mentioned there has been like a 600% rise in merchant fees since 2014. So can you share like more data on what the current fees is and how does it vary? Like, does it vary by number of transactions, or does it vary by like how big a vendor you are, for example? And my second question is, let's say if I'm a small vendor, just have a small shop somewhere, and then I get, let's say, £1,000, just someone gives me like on a transaction. What would be the fees breakdown, for example, that I have to pay like a merchant, like a MasterCard or something, versus open bankers, just to see like at the end what amount of cash would be in my pocket, and where do I lose money along the funnel?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to take that one unless somebody else wants to.
Not me.
The um, it's very hard to give a specific answer, to that question, down to the basis point, so to speak. But the macro answer is because open banking cuts out the middleman effectively in terms of schemes and payment processors and payment providers largely. The general rule of thumb is that an open banking payment that goes directly from one bank account to another across payment rails that already exist between banks, that they already use to move money, that are almost always free, like the faster payment system here in the UK, then the rule of thumb is it's an order of magnitude less to move money account to account than it is via an instrument like a credit card, for example, because for those that know how the credit card industry works, there's lots of good things about the credit card industry for sure. Maybe one of the less ideal things is the number of intermediaries that typically sit in the chain of movement of money between issuers, merchant acquirers, payment processors, the card schemes themselves, and so on. They all have a role to play, but it was a system that was largely designed 40 or 50, 60 years ago, in fact, that has been largely retrofitted for the modern online world. To your question of if somebody's moving £1,000 from one bank account to another, then you'd typically be looking at a tenth of the cost of what it would cost to move that same amount using cards. That depends a lot on the nature of the payment, the size of the business, and so many things. But you can be looking at 100, 150 plus basis points, in the world of credit cards, where you're typically looking more like 15, 20, 25 basis points in the world of open banking.
Does that answer your question? Excellent. We've got another hand up here, I think, as well. If you can just pass the microphone across there, Ilkan. Again, if you can just start saying who you are and what organisation you're representing, please.
Hi, I'm James. I'm representing Reuters Events. Just a quick question for Joe. Because customers need to deposit funds in the Pleo account, does that mean you need a banking or FinTech license? And do your customers also have a commercial Pleo card that they can spend at businesses?
So to your second question, yes. So our customers give cards to all of their employees. So for example, I work for Pleo. There's about 900 employees. We all have cards, and you use that for the business spend that you need. So for example, the conference, right? And to your first question, Pleo has an e-money license. So we work with partners for our banking, yeah.
And is that a physical card or a virtual card?
Either. Both.
Sorry, are you with which card network is it under?
MasterCard.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can have Apple Pay, Google Pay with your virtual cards, or you can have a physical card as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we've talked a lot about open banking here in the UK, both in this session and in the previous one as well. Well, you mentioned as well your recent launch in the Netherlands. How quickly can the adoption roll out into new territories, and in your opinion, how wide can it go? That's for both of you as well.
I can say one of the challenges we had was going from the UK to Europe was that there's a slightly different open banking spec, so we had to change a bit of the way that we did authentication to have the product fit to Europe. But once we did that, it's less a matter of how the tech works after that. It's more a matter of how we manage the rollout in that local market. So for example, are our sales teams on board, customer success, do they understand what we're doing and what we're changing? Do customers know what's coming and how the experience is going to change for them when we actually roll the product out, right? So I said we went live last week with Netherlands. That's what we've been going through for the last maybe month or two to get ready for rolling out in the Netherlands. And a lot of that has been around checking the experience, testing it across all of the banks, talking to customers, getting their feedback. And yeah, I think month on month we can probably go to new markets in 1 or 2 months for the rollout.
And the Netherlands is well known, I would say, as being quite forward-looking when it comes to the adoption of fintech and new methods of banking. What other countries do you think are ripe for opportunity when it comes to open banking?
I'm happy to take that one. Actually, each year we publish a piece of research The first time we did it coincided with the Euros, the football tournament. So we called it the Open Banking League. See what we did there? It was quite clever. Yeah. And what we did was basically stack rank all of the countries in Europe in terms of open banking readiness, maturity, and so forth as well. Because as Joe says, there's a lot of factors that that come into play. I think we should. Connie from the OBIE, the Open Banking Implementation Entity that was up here previously, mentioned that the approach that was taken in the UK to define the standards and roll them out was somewhat unique. That shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the positive impact that had in terms of catalysing the market, whereas what we've seen is a spectrum across other countries in Europe of, how shall I say, let the market sort it out itself, as opposed to having kind of a centralized entity that's driving it. As Joe says, there's some varying technical standards and so forth as well. But consistently over the last couple of years, the UK has had a leadership position because this is where it's all started. France, Germany, the Nordics, Netherlands, all of these countries have surged in the last 12 months in terms of their maturity from when we measured it the first time to when we measured it in the middle of this year. And I think we'll kind of continue to see generally good progress across a lot of those countries that have got critical mass, I should say, as it comes to open banking.
Okay, one just final question, because I know we're a little bit short of time here. I can't even say variable recurring.
Say VRP.
VRP. We all know what VRP is, right? VRP, you mentioned that the tipping point there was making the experience 10 times better, right? So in terms of making a process 10 times better, what's next on the horizon that you're most excited about? And that's for both of you again.
I can mention one. It's falling into the same thing I was saying before around cash flow management. So if you're performing invoice payments in using Pleo, and you have, say, £100,000 that you need to pay out, right? You want to pay that out sort of on time so that you keep your supplier happy, but also at the last minute, because it's cash flow that you need to have for your business so that you can pay your employees, right? Using variable recurring payments, Pleo can time that perfectly. We don't have to wait for the customer to set a Google Calendar reminder to sit down and move money to pay their supplier, right? We can literally pull the funds at the exact right moment and then send it out. And that gives you other benefits that you might not think about immediately, which is, for example, if we're paying an FX payment, we can pay at the right time where the rate is good. Or we can use all sorts of interesting ways to make that payment more efficient. So that's what I'm excited about, and I'm not seeing that done incredibly well by anyone right now, so I'd love to see how that gets disrupted over the next few years.
And Iain, same question to you.
We've talked a lot about VRP and moving money from an account that I own to another account that I own. Actually, then the next horizon for that is moving money from my account to pay my utility bill, or pay it to a friend, or on a regular basis, repay a loan, whatever the case may be. So far, the first part of VRP, which is referred to as sweeping, which is a terrible term, it's not that descriptive, is about moving money between my own accounts. The next horizon for that is my accounts to other people's accounts, to finally do away with direct debits, which are a very inefficient method of payment.
Absolutely, they are. Direct debits and Excel spreadsheets should both be confined to 101 hell. Okay, thank you so much, Iain and Joe. Thank you, guys.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Thank you.